Right, so thank you for joining us today. So we've had the government publish a white paper recently. Do you feel that it is covering enough of the ground that needs to be covered, first of all?
Well, I think the white paper is a very shabby affair. It's very thin. It rehashes some of the rather vague speeches that Theresa May has been making. It says one or two things which are staggering, really. I mean, one thing it says is we've always been sovereign, but it hasn't felt as if we've been sovereign, which is, of course, one of the major planks of the Leave campaign, so that's very startling. The claim that the whole country is uniting behind the Brexit endeavour is another staggering claim. The referendum has been so divisive, and there's such a lot of anger and upset in the country about this. I'm afraid I think that all that is bad enough, but the very worst thing is that a white paper which should set out options, should examine the costs and benefits, should compare those costs and benefits with remaining in the EU, was published at 4 o'clock in the morning on the day after the Article 50 trigger vote. I think that is really shameful.
So Theresa May's white paper, we've touched on this a little bit. It's essentially a wish list from the government. How achievable do you think that wish list is going to be?
Well, you know, all the expert opinion before and since the referendum itself has pointed out repeatedly that there is a huge task to be done. If the UK were to leave the EU, it's not a done deal yet, but if it were to, it has to start all over again with dozens and dozens, scores of new arrangements to make, new trade deals to strike, new partnerships to try to arrive at. And this is, by the way, in a world which over the last couple of decades has been emulating the EU. In South Asia and Africa, in South America, different groups of countries have been forming their own versions of the EU for the benefit of their own member states. And so when we leave the biggest, the richest, the best of them, the EU, we're going to find ourselves outside all these other mini EUs around the world. And the task is just staggering. So one really worries about what the position is going to be for the UK and how many lost years we're going to have.
And what position do you think is the best the UK can hope to be in if it is going to be leaving the single market or the customs union?
Well, if Brexit happens and we leave the EU, then obviously there's a whole gradation of things. The very best is that we remain in the single market, that we keep within the customs union, that we allow free movement of people. In other words, the best option is to stay in the EU, because to be outside it looks as though it's going to be extremely damaging economically.
You've been very vocal about how it's Parliament's responsibility to acknowledge the decision that the people have made, but to make the decision in the best interest of the country. Given that Parliament's not going to be doing that, what democratic recourse do you think there is to addressing this issue now?
Well, I think the next steps are this. We've got to keep up the fight to try to keep the UK in the EU. And this might be to try to get a change of mind, a change of sentiment in the country and in Parliament, so that we go back on the Article 50 trigger, that we get a proper, full, unwhipped debate in Parliament, that we maybe, and I think this is a really key issue coming back into focus now, have another referendum in which one of the options is to stay in the EU. And if that doesn't happen, if Brexit actually happens and we actually do leave the EU, then we just keep fighting to get back into the EU. I think one absolutely crucial thing is this, that everybody who's keen on membership of the EU for the UK should see this as short-term, medium-term, long-term. The short and medium-term is to try and stay in. We don't want to leave and lose all the benefits. But if it does happen, then we should fight to get back in again. The people who are making or trying to make Brexit happen should understand that this is never going to stop, this fight to keep the UK in the EU.
So you've touched upon the issue of referendums, maybe having a further referendum about whether we stay. Would you suggest that's once we see what deal the government's got, or how would you go about arguing that should take place so it's not seen as a rerun of the referendum we've just had?
It should be a referendum on the deal, and one of the alternatives should be to stay in the EU, to keep what we've got at the moment. And it shouldn't be a rerun of the referendum we had, because the referendum we had was very gerrymandered. It left out all those groups that had the most material interest in the outcome of a referendum. 16, 17-year-olds, many expatriates, EU citizens who pay their taxes and work here in the UK. And had they had the vote, and they should have had it, but they were excluded. Had they had it, we wouldn't be in this position now. We would be getting on with other things that matter to us in our lives. Instead of which, as a result of a gerrymandered franchise, as a result of a very, very small minority vote, which was only advisory, and the capitulation of our so-called sovereign parliament, giving over sovereignty to what was in effect a minority of the electorate, has left us in this mess. So the only way to get out of a mess is to fight and to keep fighting with the long-term aim of having the UK in the EU.
And how would you say is the best way to go about securing that second referendum if it's not going to come through Parliament itself?
Well, obviously, if there's going to be another referendum, there has to be another referendum bill, so Parliament has to take this matter up. So we have to fight for that. We've got to try to argue, persuade, change minds, get a momentum going, force whoever is the government at the time, because, you know, this could be going on for some years. There could be a general election between now and then. Somebody once said, I think it was Harold Macmillan, that a week is a long time in politics, so almost anything can happen. But if there was a great upsurge of feeling in the country and a demand that another referendum be held on the outcome of the process, then it may prove irresistible. And that would be something really worth working towards.
So just about, obviously a referendum on the deal depends on the ability for Article 50 to be revoked. That case is going through the Irish courts at the moment, or will start soon with Joe Malm's case. And I just wanted to know on what conditions you thought it would be possible to revoke Article 50.
Well, it seems to me to be reasonably open and shut that the Article 50 trigger should be revocable. I mean, it's not something that was handed down by the gods of Olympus. This is something which it's up to we human beings to discuss with our partners and friends in Europe. And in fact, it's already been intimated by our European colleagues that there is a way back from this. So naturally enough, we hope that might be the case. If it weren't, then okay, let's leave the EU on Friday and rejoin on Monday. I mean, again, there are all sorts of ways to deal with this problem, but the ultimate goal, which is full and fully engaged UK membership of the EU, that is the goal that we'll work for, whatever happens between now and then.
And obviously you mentioned earlier that the referendum was only advisory. However, many people in the public feel that it was a binding referendum, regardless of the legislation that was passed. What arguments would you make to those people, Leave and Remain voters, that this to show them this wasn't intended to be binding and that it is absolutely democratic for them to be given a say later on?
Well, this is open and shut. There was a briefing paper published by the House of Commons Library on the 3rd of June 2015. Section 5 points out, iterates and specifies that the referendum is intended to be advisory and consultative only, that it doesn't bind either the government or Parliament as to what they should do about the outcome of the referendum. Section 6 warns Parliament that if they were going to treat it as binding or mandatory, that it wouldn't do to have just a simple majority, they would need a supermajority. In most other mature countries, that's 60 or 66% of the vote. But even more, on the 20th of June 2015, the Minister for Europe stood up in the House of Commons and said, and it's there in Hansard, this is an advisory referendum only, it doesn't bind us, nothing is said in the legislation about what should happen after the outcome of the referendum. And he pointed out that the Scottish independence referendum and the voting referendum that were held in 2014-2011 were themselves non-binding and advisory only. He specifically cited those facts. So there is no ground whatever for treating the outcome of the referendum as mandatory. And even if there had been, even if it had been explicitly laid down in the bill itself, which it wasn't, that it's mandatory, the fact that only 37% of the electorate voted to leave would itself provide no justification whatever for taking the outcome to issue and are leaving the EU.
And just going slightly off the EU topic specifically, but do you think this referendum will be the end of referendums in the United Kingdom?
Well, referendums are not natural allies of representative democracy, which we have. Unfortunately, our representative democracy is not working. It's not working because of the party discipline, the whipping system, which in fact just gives total power to an executive which happens to have a one-seat majority in the House of Commons. This is not satisfactory. And so we've got to look at our constitution and the way our representative democracy works. But referendum shouldn't be held in a representative democracy because it raises this complete inconsistency. Do we have a sovereign parliament, or are the voters in a referendum sovereign? Which is it? Now, with all the talk about the advisory referendum, the sovereignty of parliament was meant to be retained. But has parliament behaved in a sovereign way? So many of the MPs who voted to trigger Article 50 said, we know this is the wrong thing to do, we're Remainers, the great majority of MPs are Remainers, but we're being whipped by our party discipline machine into voting for it. Something is badly broken in the process, and therefore we should try to avoid referendums in future, other than the necessity of having another one this time round.
And on to Britain's role in the world. Do you feel that the presence of Donald Trump as President of the United States and the relationship he's building with Theresa May will make people more cautious about the special relationship that the United Kingdom has and how that impacts on the European Union?
Well, you can bet your bottom dollar that Donald Trump had forgotten that Theresa May had visited half an hour after she left the White House. So we can't place any reliance whatever on any kind of relationship with the United States of America. Donald Trump, in his inauguration speech, said, America first, America first. You've got to bring back all the investments, bring back the businesses, bring back manufacturing, and put up the walls. Not just a wall against Mexico, but protectionism. We will be leaving, as I said, the biggest single trading bloc in the world to find ourselves alone in an environment of a tremendous amount of protectionism, actually, because of all the different organizations internationally which mimic the EU, and America itself becoming more protectionist now. So I'm afraid we are going to be out there in the cold, faced with the consequences. And what are those consequences? They are a smaller GDP, less money for health, welfare, education, defense, scientific research, less money to spend on welfare. If we go down the route of becoming a sort of offshore tax haven in the hope that we can get outside investment because our taxes are low, then we're not going to have money for health, welfare, education and the rest. I mean, we're really heading down the tubes with this, something that was foreseen by people with expertise before the referendum. But then you will remember that a man who had been Secretary of State for Education said that we've heard too much from experts.
So on the way politics is going at the moment, with Donald Trump becoming President of the United States, Britain leaving the EU, Geert Wilders and Marine Le Pen riding high in the polls in the Dutch and French national elections, what hope do you see for progressives in this political environment?
Well, it's not so much a question of what hope do I see, but what work do I see? Because with this rise of populism, to try to protect the values of the liberal democratic order, if we believe in them, if we believe in civil liberties, if we believe in a mature and sensible way of people participating in our governing processes, we've got to stop this upsurge of populism in its tracks. We have to stand firm. I mean, we've seen this before. Alas, it looks like history repeating itself, and we know how very badly things can go wrong. Things can reach a tipping point, and then there's a cascade effect that we can't manage. Things are being done and said today in 2017 that would have been unimaginable 12 months ago or 10 years ago. And this change in the landscape, this sudden shift, as if there'd been a kind of tectonic shock, is terribly surprising, not least because it puts the whole future of our young people and of the country itself, of the EU and the world, up for grabs. What is the world going to be like in 10 years' time if people like Geert Wilders and Marine Le Pen and Trump and the Brexiters in the UK really get their way and change this consensus that we've had, which has brought peace, it's brought progress, it's brought unity, it's brought the possibility of a great idea, the great project of the EU, which, by the way, has been so understated in the UK. People haven't really been told just what the value of it is. All they've seen are the difficulties that any great project will face because it's a work in progress. But to see that upset and undermined by this new wave of populism would, I think, be a tragedy of historic proportions.
And you've touched on some of the benefits that the EU brings there, but for you personally, what is it that makes you feel European?
Oh, I mean, I just love the fact that one is part of a great story which has in it Beethoven and Goethe and Vermeer, all the art, the music, the cultural tradition, the philosophy, the science. You know, Europe in the last 4 centuries has produced, in addition to a tremendous amount of strife and war, which precisely the EU is trying to overcome, but it has produced all the riches of the modern world in the way of everything that has made a difference to us in science and in culture. That is something to be proud of, something to want to be part of, something to want to help progress and to grow, not to run away from and not to turn one's back on it.